Okay, we should be on now.
That's great. Welcome to meeting the Land Use Subcommittee of the Athens-Clarke County Planning Commission. Okay, our other two members are not going to be able to be with us today. We are a committee of 3 plus 3 people from the planning department. Is Aaron here with us? Or am I just?
I'm here.
Okay, great. Aaron, glad you're here. All right, so let me before we move into a new topic, let me just say I assume that you all got the email that I sent out to the whole planning commission as a whole about our meeting on Thursday the 17th at 5:30, and at that meeting we will be presenting the 2 topics that we have completed up to this point. And after Bruce and I finished the road interconnectivity, I sent that to you all. I assume you thought it was just peachy perfect. And but I didn't hear, so I used that. Did anybody have any questions about that? Since when we left, it was kind of the minutes and thoughts, and we tried to put together what was said related to that. Does anybody have any question about that so that we can feel comfortable at answering questions on the 17th? Okay, then we're going to move forward. If you by chance, and Catherine, I know they sent you the materials as a new commissioner, but you may not have these 2 things right in front of you. But I have try to go back and look at the charge that came directly from the mayor, the Planning Commission's Inclusionary Development Charge from Mayor Gertz. And then we went from that to a memo that came to us from Bruce about how to divide that charge. I'm saying this mostly for Catherine, how to divide that charge into information for the Housing Subcommittee and information for the land use. They, as well as we, they have finished 2 things also. And so Matt and I have been in contact, then I went to Brad with some questions about what direction he and the planning folks would like us to move in. The housing folks are doing something that's not on the chart. So I can't even remember what it is. Aaron, do you know?
Sorry, what the house is working on right now?
Yeah.
I think they're wrapping up with everything on their charge.
Okay. I could go back and find that email. It was something that came to their attention that they were very interested in and thought was pertinent. That was out of an article that Lucy sent. And I can't articulate the topic right now, so sorry about that. In addition, and I asked Brad this, the Housing Subcommittee wanted to know if we were going to focus on the growth concept map. Bruce, do you have any information, or Rick, about any answer to that?
Yes. So the growth concept map and the future land use map are outside of the mayor's charge.
Okay.
And so our focus right now is really to wrap this up so that we can get it into the Planning Commission's hands to take action, and then get it punted up to the mayor and commission so that they can deal with it how they intend to.
Right.
Once we get that finished, I think we'll probably be staring into the holidays. And so Brad's advice was that if there are other topics that these groups want to continue working on, perhaps the new year is when we can pick up those other topics. I know for land use, definitely the growth concept map, trying to finish that exercise so that we can start working on the more detailed future land use map. That was our priority, but that would be for the new year is what Brad was suggesting.
Okay, so that helps Kristen and Catherine and me know I had finished that discussion with questions, and Brad was going to send that back, and as well he has. So that's great. So what direction are we moving in now? And Bruce says he has 2 recommendations for us, and we need to choose which one we want to go in. So Bruce, can you take charge and give us that information?
Sure. So the next item, if we were working sequentially down through the memo on the land use side of things, was to look at minimum lot sizes. And I sent an email out to everybody, and I hope, Catherine, you in particular, because I had trouble getting something to you before. Hopefully you got it.
Today?
But it's, yes, this
I got it
afternoon
today.
at about 2:30. I
I never read things that come on the day, so I haven't read it either.
Okay, but I just need to know that you received it.
Okay, let me go in and see
And
if I did, Bruce.
And I'll be sharing it. I can share it.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Okay,
So that is entirely about minimum lot size, that information that's in that email.
okay.
But in talking to Brad, he had raised the question whether this group would want to look at the greenfield development housing height issue that was at the very top of the housing group's list. It was mentioned that amongst staff, when we were talking about how the committees are going, that might be a topic that the land use group could take on because the housing group was moving on to that other subject. And it is a part of the mayor's charge. So, by way of background on the 2 topics, minimum lot size was clearly on our side of the ledger. And I think the reason why the mayor was bringing that up was to look at the potential for allowing more residential yield in an attempt to help with affordability. So bringing more volume of housing units into the market might have an impact on affordability. I think Brad has articulated this in meetings, and I think we've talked about it as a subcommittee. If we take that up, we may come up with some recommendations, but we may want to still have that be linked to an affordable housing program so that we don't give away density without being able to connect it in a meaningful way to some sort of housing, affordable housing system that we put in place here in Athens-Clarke County. The last thing we want to do is loosen up our regulations and make things happen and then wish we had that back when we want to use that loosening as an incentive to get affordable units. But that's a little bit of background on the minimum lot size. The topic regarding greenfield development, that is in the mayor's charge tangentially, I think, not necessarily about affordable housing, but this was him responding to concerns that he had heard from developers and folks that were planning for new subdivisions in the county. When we changed our subdivision regulations and our setbacks a few years back to help work on infill and to get really more context-sensitive development so that we weren't getting really tall houses next to littler, shorter houses, we did a sliding scale where for every foot of building height above 20 feet, you had to add an additional foot of setback, especially on the sides and the rear. And we also changed it to where we have 2 calculations for front yard setbacks. All of this with the goal of helping new infill development not overshadow, literally, the neighbors. What was decided is that, as those text amendments were being brought together, was that it should apply across the entire county. And when that wording was put in place, it meant that any new subdivision, even if it was one that was next to nothing, on the edge of town, for example, they would still have to use these same setback metrics for sliding back into your lot as you get taller, or at least above 20 feet tall. And his request of us, of the Planning Commission, was to revisit that and see if that sliding scale on setback could be taken away from greenfield development. So essentially, if there's a brand new subdivision being built, it's creating its own context right away. It's not infill in the definition of infill that I think the mayor is sort of working with.
Excuse me, Rick, can you mute? I think we're getting some sound from somewhere.
So those are the two topics.
Okay, I'm looking at the mayor's charge. Tell me, I'm looking, application of single-family height restrictions in greenfield development. That's what the one is. The other is minimum lot and home sizes. Now, has housing subcommittee looked at minimum house sizes?
Yes.
They've already done that.
Yes.
Okay, so so ours would be singularly lot sizes.
Right.
Okay, all right. I'm all for making sure we're on the way we've been working is to stay on the mayor's charge. I'm all for staying on the mayor's charge. And then moving off later. I think that's a better working process. Okay, Kristen and Catherine. Well, let me ask Bruce, Rick, is there one that seems more important for us to address first?
What do you think, Rick?
Well, I think on a daily basis, I think what Bruce was saying earlier about the residential lot sizes, and I think we can sort of equate that to density. I think we're really talking about density, because when you go over 2 acres, the lot size goes away, and it's based on density for a subdivision. You know, like 2.3 houses an acre, that type of thing. So you can be flexible with your lot sizes. So I think, as Bruce was saying, I think looking at density, there is certainly a way we can up a density in every zone, but to do that, we may want to think about tying it into making housing more affordable, some kind of the housing committee is looking at that right now, I think, with the GIC committee, this sort of a third party arrangement that would make sure we have affordable housing that can be managed, supervised in a way. And so the other thing that we do on a daily basis is the single family height and greenfield development. And that is something where I think Brad's really an advocate of this too, is that if someone's developing right now their own subdivision and they have their own sort of idea of how they want to build the houses in that subdivision, there's really no need to have the extra setbacks. The extra setbacks were put in because of complaints about tear downs and rebuilds. As you have smaller homes in like 5 Points or Cobham or Boulevard, whatever, and all of a sudden you've got, a 2 or 3 story house next to the smaller, older homes. And we were getting a lot of, criticism on that. And so we have this true value now. Like Bruce was saying, the taller the house, the more the setback. But, those weren't really planned out subdivisions. Those older days, you bought your lot and you got your builder and you built your house. Everything's so different. All the different house styles is very, there's a lot of variety. Whereas in a planned subdivision nowadays with tract building, you have 3 or 4 house plans, but they're basically the same. So there's really no need to protect one new house from another new house. It's going to be that way when somebody buys it. They're going to know what they're buying. as every house, every lot gets developed. It's not like someone coming in 50 years later, tearing down a house and building a new one. So, so I think that's sort of an easy, maybe an easy fix too. Hopefully, I'm not saying that, but if there's a date we can set upon by saying at a certain date, any newer subdivision can build under the basic standards of setbacks. So you have a 6-foot setback, you have an 8-foot setback, that type of thing. It's not based on the height, and that'd be for new track building.
But
So it's not gonna,
what do you do then with the infill stuff?
yeah, I mean, it's not infill would remain. We keep the infill true value, the sliding scale, sliding setbacks for the infill housing, but not for someone now building out on Discovery Trail, way out Burnett Shoals
I
Road,
know.
Creekside Manor, way out Old Meadow Road. You know, those people are planning their own developments right now. They really don't need the extra protection for an infill house. You know, every house is going to pretty much be the same.
So Rick, those setback requirements, so those apply to everything? I was thinking that they were only for infill housing.
Well, right now, as Bruce was saying, it's countywide.
Interesting.
We do have some subdivisions that were exempted. We have a certain range of years, but since the ordinance was adopted, anything new, even a new development, has to meet it. So we're basically trying to exempt the new developments, not keep it for keep the old protections, keep the 5 points, whatever's not in local historic district, Cobham Boulevard, all the older ones in town. Keep those protections. That's what people wanted, but they're not talking about way out. Nature Walk, Oak Grove. They're really not talking about out there where they're just now building developments. There's no need to have that extra protection.
And there are,
Hey, Rick,
Yeah,
let me jump in for just a second.
sure, Bruce.
The other way to look at this wouldn't necessarily be a point in time, but would be to look at the size of a development. Right now our standards divide out at the 2-acre threshold. And so if we were to say that the variable setback standards don't apply to developments of 2 acres or greater in size, it's very, very rare that we would have a 2-acre plus infill development. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's interesting because I see this rule as more of a neighborhood protection rather than am I saying that right? Like, because it's not like the new houses need to be protected from each other. I mean, they're all going to be built in the scale. The whole purpose of these setback requirements and everything was to try to mitigate the crazy differences in scales that were happening in old neighborhoods. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, because if you have these, any new developments, whether it's something like Oak Grove, for example, that's already kind of planned out but not already built out. So if you're working with more than several acres, you don't have to worry about these restrictions.
So essentially, what we would be saying if we took the approach of leaving the variable height setback standards for under 2-acre lots, essentially, would be just that. Like, they would be existing lots of record that would have to follow those setbacks moving forward. And that's where I think that's where Rick,
you all are talking in language that you understand. I don't. Those setbacks, I don't know when you say that, I don't know what you're talking about. So you're going to have to be more definitive for me to catch up.
Okay. So the way this applies to our minimum lot size discussion as well as to this greenfield discussion, the notion that our development standards for doing a single family subdivision are different when you're subdividing under 2 acres than when you're subdividing 2 acres or more. Mm-hmm. We have different rules, and the rules change at 2 acres. And to Rick's point about a point in time, I was also adding the notion that moving forward, we also might want to say these variable setbacks, the setbacks that get bigger as your house gets taller. If we're agreeing that is maybe a standard that shouldn't apply to a brand new subdivision where you have new house built next to new house, that there's probably two ways to remedy this. One is to say, from this, moving forward, any new subdivision of land of 2 acres or more to create a subdivision that's greater than 2 acres in size doesn't have to use that sliding scale setback where your setbacks get taller or wider as your house gets taller.
So then you're saying if that developer wanted to put a 35-foot house 5 feet from the street, that'd be fine if he put them all there. Is that what you're saying?
Well, without those numbers, but yeah, in concept, yes.
Well,
Yeah.
I was really meaning using those numbers. I'm not hearing you put any protection on a set.
Okay, so the only thing that would change, let me try to be real clear. The only thing that would change is the fact that your setback would grow as your building got tall. There are still setbacks in place. There's a starting point for all of our setbacks. You don't start at 0. We already have numbers in place, but what we have in the code today says that number that's in place now, you've got to add a foot to that number for every foot over 20 feet of your house, that your house goes.
As in the infill stuff.
As in, right, it was intended for infill, but the way it was ultimately adopted and the way it was recommended was to have it countywide. And so that's what we're talking about.
That either. I didn't know that either.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
So what, if we don't tie it to the 2 acres, what would be the way to tie it to just existing neighborhoods? Because I think that'd be more direct just to say if it's next to a house that we don't want to dwarf, then it can still apply.
Correct. So there's 2 ways to define existing neighborhoods, and one is to have a point in time, and that's what Rick was talking about, where any neighborhood platted up to such and such date doesn't have to follow that setback standard.
Can we look at a chart or something? That setback, those setbacks, those numbers, I don't know what those are. You all know what they are. I've got to look at some number before I have any idea what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, and this is where this was the second area of discussion. What I sent you today wasn't about greenfield development.
Oh,
So,
well, I just pulled it up and tried to look at it. So I guess that was okay. So bottom line is we can't really talk. I can't talk about that without some information to look at. I can't follow the conversation.
and that
I hear what you say, but I got to have some number on it. I've got, those setbacks and what I can't work like that. So.
okay.
Whatever. I know Bruce is prepared for the residential lot size discussion. If you guys want to go ahead and do that one, and next time we can talk about the other issue.
Yeah, if I could just ask though, remind me again what greenfield development is. I've heard this term and I'm just not remembering what that is.
I mean, that's essentially taking an undeveloped plot and building on it. So it started green and it's going to grow houses or some sort of development. Undeveloped land is another way of saying greenfield development.
Okay, I see. Yeah, no, so I've been taking some notes as we've been talking, and I think that I hear what you're saying about these two different ideas of the variable height setback standards and then the overall looking at greenfield development. I think I was kind of thinking we would talk about minimum residential lot sizes. And I kind of wonder, I don't know. I would be okay with kind of chewing on what these newer items are over the next couple weeks and thinking about how much we want to dig into them after the residential lot sizes. Does that make sense?
Yes. What do you think, Maxine? You're muted. Maxine, you're muted.
I said I'm game as long as I have something that I can look at and really understand what you're talking about. I think I have a really good understanding. I'm sorry, I have an understanding. For me, it's relatively good of how infill works. I worked really hard when we were doing that to really learn that, and I think I understand that. I'm just, I had no idea then it applied to everything that was being built from then on. I just thought it related to infill housing. That's really interesting to me.
And Maxine, just to clarify, it doesn't apply to subdivisions that have been platted between 2001 and February of 2017. So we do have that point in time.
When did we, what was the year that we did the infill work?
2017.
Okay, so say what you just said again, Aaron.
So between 2001 and 2017, February of 2017 is when the infill passed. So being platted between those dates goes by the old setbacks, which are what you're having a problem with. Knowing those setbacks that were in place.
So what you're saying is this whole discussion is going to relate only to.
I know it's confusing.
So this is the decision we can make tonight, and this is why I was bringing this up.
Okay.
If this group wants to talk about it, we can plan accordingly, and as Rick said, we can deal with it in our next meeting, and we can get resources to you to help, understand it and graphic, views of what this does and what it doesn't do and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But tonight, we wanted to bring it up with you as a group to see if this is something that you are willing to take on, and we can let Brad know and also Matt know that this group will do the greenfield building height variable setback issue after the minimum lot size, if that's the way you want to proceed.
That's fine with me.
That
Yeah.
seems fine.
The more I'm thinking about this, it's interesting because I feel like the setbacks were created more of like to help preserve kind of one-off new builds in existing neighborhoods rather than entire subdivisions. But it is an interesting idea to use that as a counterweight to getting greater density in neighborhoods. So, because at first, when you're first describing it, I was thinking, well, how does this really help affordable housing? But if we use it more of like a carrot and stick kind of incentive rather than just this blanket thing that happens across the board, we could maybe use that to our advantage. So I think I need to know a little bit more about how it has been used to maybe adjust some developments, or whether it's a one-off house versus a subdivision that has been proposed and how that's changed maybe what was built there, or if it's affected anything. Maybe that's the only thing I would be curious about when we have more discussions on this.
Yeah, I would also love to see examples of how the variable setbacks have been applied.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was saying, Catherine. We said that at the same time. Good.
Okay. Thank you. That's good stuff. So we'll talk about minimum lot sizes now then. Okay. All right. Rick, would you be able to open up what I sent? And and share it.
Bruce, I'm going to ask you a favor. I tried to print it out so I could have it in front of me, and it's in a landscape mode, and it's not printing right on the paper somehow.
Okay. I did it landscape so it would fit. It doesn't fit very well if you turn it the other way.
There's something about the margins. I have a very wide margin on the right-hand side of the page, and on the left-hand side of the page, the material is cut off. So maybe it's me. I don't know, but just FYI, we can look at that. Let's look at it on Rick's.
Okay, I'm just double checking my margins while you're mentioning that. That should be. I don't know. I don't know what the issue there might be.
That's all right. Rick's got it up for us. Let's use that.
All right. Okay. So what I always like to do, and I think it's helpful, is to go ahead and look at what we currently have in the code so we understand what hand we're dealing with first. So as it relates to minimum lot size, these are the sections of the code that have a direct impact on density, yield, which I really think, as Rick said, I think that's really the topic here. Minimum lot size generates a yield of development out of a given acre of land. And so literally the minimum lot size standard for our single family zoning occurs in table 973, which you see here on the first page. And it's the first substantive kind of row of information. So each zone, each of the 5 RS flavors of single family development has a minimum lot size assigned to it that's actually in the name of the zone. So RS40 is a 40,000 square foot minimum lot size. RS25 is 25,000 square foot, and so on. And what we did was, as I mentioned before, we took our development standards and divided them out to where when you have under 2 acres of land that you're trying to subdivide, we're using that metric of your minimum lot size to dictate how many lots you can get out of that dirt that's less than 2 acres in size. So if you've got a 1.99 acre piece of land and you are RS5, you're going to take 1.99 acres and divide it by 5,000 square feet, and that'll tell you back of the envelope style how many lots you can get out of what you own. You then have to figure out how to make the geometry work. And the geometry is what comes in these following rows of information. So minimum lot width, which also means how much street frontage your lot has to have. That's the first metric. And not every street is straight. Not every piece of land is a nice square or a rectangle. And so you sometimes might have a back of the envelope yield of 20 lots, but when you actually start looking at how you can do your lot width and also your lot depth, you may end up with less than that because there's no good way to reach that maximum yield given the geometry of the land or the proximity to a street that exists in reality. So that's kind of a fundamental concept about minimum lot size. That's how we use it when we have 2 acres, when we have under 2 acres of land that somebody wants to subdivide. That tends to be in town where people are doing infill, but it also does occur in our suburban settings, in our rural settings, where somebody might own some land and they want to carve off a piece for a family member or sell it or whatever. These are minor subdivisions, I guess is the other way to put it. Other communities look at them that way.
M-I-N-O-R, minor?
Yes, as opposed to major.
Okay. Meaning smaller? I mean, what does minor mean?
For us, it means 4 lots. 4 lots or fewer are being created. All right. So the other way that we use a density calculation is when you have 2 acres or more, or you're subdividing 5 lots or more. And what we did, instead of using a hard minimum lot size, was we had a number of units per acre metric that's there. So I want you to look at the RS5 column, which is on the far right-hand side. Under RS5, which you can have a 5,000 square foot minimum lot size if you're doing less than 2 acres. But if you've got more than 2 acres, your yield is 6 units per acre. Well, if Jim Anderson was sitting here, he'd tell us very quickly that that math doesn't work. That 6 units per acre is not the same as 5,000 square foot lots coming out of a 43,560 square foot acre. And he'd be right. The way this code was written was with the notion that if you are doing a larger subdivision, a major subdivision, 5 lots or more, you are likely to have some dedication of streets and some dedication of other space that can't be subdivided. It needs to be held in common for utilities or access or other purposes. And so the yield here has been adjusted downward to leave that amount of space out of the calculation. So one, and I'll just stop right there because this is one of the spaces, and Rick mentioned this at the top of our meeting, where we could make a revision to the code. We could say that instead of 6 dwelling units per acre in RS5, we go ahead and say it is whatever 5,000 square foot lots are going to give you and be done. And that would be about 2.7 units extra per acre, potentially, if the circumstance dictates that they can do it without having to build a street or do other things to take away from the land that can't be used as part of a lot. That's one solution here, is to no longer have that downward adjusted ratio. The other metrics that are in here, which are minimum lot width and street frontage and lot depth and the lot coverage, those principles are all still the same. I just left them in there for context. Because if we do want to run an exercise and actually look at a piece of land, and I didn't pull up anything tonight where we could take a piece of land and pretend we're subdividing it, but we could. That information that's on the sheet of paper would help us do that. But the main difference here is the second row, where we have minimum lot sizes listed, and the fourth row from the bottom, which is the dwelling units per acre standard. I think that's where the mayor was headed, I think. On the second page, and I think that's where our discussion is going to focus, but I want to tell you about the second page. The other part of the code that literally is related to density is in the section that follows that table, which is section 974. And there's 2 important things that our current set of regulations allow us to do and require. The first thing to understand is that when you're subdividing more than 2 acres, we have a calculation that we ask people to do, which is called adjusted development acreage. And the whole notion of this is recognizing the fact that not every piece of land is perfect. A lot of our land, especially as Athens-Clarke County has grown and developed, a lot of our land that's undeveloped is undeveloped for a reason. And it's because of these 5, largely because of these 5 factors that you see in this list. If there's land that's in the floodplain, if there's a body of open water, if there's wetlands, or if there's land within our riparian buffer that buffers our streams and our creeks, or if there are steep slopes, those areas come off of the top, out of the gross, and the net amount of acreage left over, because we want to protect those from development, that net amount of acreage is what you are going to be calculating your lot yield from. So in Athens, we take that calculation right off the top. And not every community does that. The second thing we have, and this was the yin, this is the yang to the yin, is we also have a density bonus. And we haven't seen a ton of residential subdivisions in the last few years. So we've seen even fewer that have used this bonus, but there was a time where this bonus was a very popular thing. And the notion here is, in our development standards for subdivisions, we have an open space requirement of 5%. 5% of the land has to be set aside for active recreation. And what we said was, if you dedicate more than that 5%, for each 1% more than 5, you get to increase the allowable density, the total you get to increase, let's see, for each 1% of the total adjusted development acreage in common open space. So this is really hard for me to read, so I want to get the wording right. You get a 1% bonus in density for each 1% of the total adjusted development acreage that you set aside as common open space over that original 5%. So the thinking here is that there's an efficiency to be gained. And this is when we were kind of trying to balance two things. One, we wanted to protect open space, and two, we wanted developers to start to think creatively about smaller lot sizes. That was an affordability thing, but it was also a notion to try to encourage clustering of development, to minimize the do no harm approach to scraping out land and all of that. And so the thinking here was, yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, when you're talking about a 1% bonus in density, is that a 1%?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, with a maximum of 25%. So it's a pretty healthy bonus if you are able to make a layout function. And you know, the thing to understand here is that when you're subdividing, for us, when you're subdividing a 2-acre tract or larger, because we don't have a minimum lot size anymore, they can get relatively small. As long as you have the appropriate width and the appropriate depth, you can have a very small lot. So the trade-off here was, if you do the small lots, we want you to set aside the balance as usable open space. So these two sections of code are what we work with in this is the simplest sense of how we calculate density and how minimum lot size factors in. Now, there are other things that come into play here, whether or not you're on public sewer or if you're on septic. If you're on septic, you can't make your lots very small. You need to have enough space on your lot to perk for your septic system. So there's other factors that come into play. But in an academic sense, these are the rules that we work with for the subdivision of land, and this is where minimum lot size factors in. Any questions on any of that? Kristen.
So yeah, when you're talking about the density bonus, is that, and I don't mean to, like, you know, I don't come to like really concrete examples so quickly, but maybe because it's kind of down the street for me, but that that subdivision that's getting built on Oglethorpe at Sunset, with all those houses packed in that square, was the density bonus how that number of houses was able to be built there? Or was it just the number of houses that could be built on that area of land?
That was the number of houses that could be built on that particular parcel.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's really, the open space that was dedicated a part of that is minimal.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because like looking at numbers is one thing, but then when you see like boots on the ground, how it plays out in real life, I mean, when I look at that, I think like, oh my goodness, those houses are packed in there like sardines, and they're going at like $400,000 a pop at least. So it's when I look at that, I think, what can we do to like not let this happen? But it all happened within everything that we allow. So I don't know.
Yeah. So that's another example of where our zoning code set the table for options for housing. How the developer chose to use those options did not really achieve an affordable goal. And depending on how you view architecturally how that development evolved, you may not really care for, like you said, how packed in they look. There were other schemes that could have been done that wouldn't have looked as tight. But our code doesn't reach that far and dictate that much detail about final construction design of those homes. So your point, though, I think punches up the fact that if we have this discussion and maybe we find comfort with something that could be changed, that it may still be something that we want to suggest as a potential change in tandem with some other measures that might call for affordability to be a part of the development scheme.
Yeah, because I think how can we, where can we now infuse a little bit more of, I don't know how incentives might help a development like that if you have a developer who's bent on doing it their way and that's the only way. Or giving people more leeway if they do other things. I don't know where that goes.
One of the things that's becoming real evident to me is that, I mean, the real bottom line on whether affordability happens or not, it's in the hands of the developer, almost no matter what you do. Which just makes it really challenging.
It does. It does. And one thing that I can put out there, and Aaron and Rick both can comment on this too. The way the code is currently written, we have not had pushback from the development community about that different metric for density when you're subdividing 2 acres or more. We've really never had any static. We've never had anybody feel like they were leaving money on the table with that particular metric. Because I think by and large, when you start designing a site, you quickly realize that the amount of land that we're saying would be given to roads and other functions is about right. So a lot of these places aren't realistically able to get much more than, say, 6 units per acre in RS5, or 3.8 acres in RS8. I mean, 3.8 units in an RS8 piece of land that's 2 acres or greater. So I'm just throwing that out there. This is not in reaction to, I don't think, the development community being upset with that residential yield standard.
Do you have any deed restrictions that can be tied to zoning regulations in Athens to like ensure affordability?
So we really don't have anything in our code right now that requires affordability. There's no link between development and affordability by ordinance. And so if it were to happen as a condition of approval, I suppose it is in the county commissioner's purview to make that a deed restriction, but it typically it rides with the zoning decision that they've made about a given development. I think I'm answering, you kind of broke up. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, that was right. I just wondered if there's any way to ensure affordability at a certain income level that we have on the books. That's
No.
okay. Just curious.
Yeah.
So as someone said before, it's really up to the developer. They can, if it's something's cheaper to build, the developer can just keep the profit. They don't have to sell or rent their product at a lower price.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of, it honestly, it makes me feel like right now, it's fair. I don't want to say it's like not restrictive. It's just like, there's obviously no real issues with developers building stuff and they can build what they want. So maybe that tells me like, maybe it needs to be beefed up where instead of building 6 dwelling units per acre on a subdivision of more than 2 acres, maybe it's 5, but if you add an affordable housing component, then we can bring it back up to 6. Like if we're not getting any pushback at 6, then what if that number were to change and then we added the incentive for affordable housing to allow it to come back to what it was?
Question. Bruce, you said that you've had no pushback on subdivisions greater than 2 acres or 5 lots or more. Have you had pushback on the 2 acres or less, or 4 or less lots?
Recently, we've had some builders in town wish that they could do smaller lots because they've figured out how they could do smaller homes. And the proportion in their mind could stay the same, and you could end up with a smaller piece of land. And I think in their mind, what they tell us is that's an opportunity for affordability. That's where we've heard some comments, is that wouldn't it be great if we had an opportunity to shave off 1,000 square feet off these minimum lot sizes with certain conditions in place? Or what if we had an RS4, and because I know I could build a house on a 4,000 square foot lot, and that would surely save people money. That's the sort of feedback I think we've heard, and it's been from a half dozen builders, a lot of the folks that do infill.
I think that's a good direction to look. If we could look at reducing lot sizes in a way that didn't hurt the character of existing neighborhoods. I think the flip side of that is saying that big lot sizes are artificially, inflating the prices.
The other factor too, when we've sat down and pursued that conversation with the ones where we know we can have an open and honest discussion, when we've asked them, so what kind of affordability are we talking about? Is this the type of affordability that is going to make a product that somebody who's making 80% of the median household income in Athens-Clarke County or less is going to be able to buy? And their answer typically is no. This would be workforce level housing. This would be housing for folks that are wanting to come back to town and live. So the empty nester sort of situation, where maybe they don't want to have a whole lot of yard to maintain, but they do want to live in a walkable area that's close to campus and close to downtown, but not quite downtown and not quite campus. So the question of affordability, affordable for whom, is the question that we've followed up on, because the other side of this is where they have less lot to finance and buy for, they tend to put that value into the home, in the finishes, in the construction type, in the amenities in the house. So these are not starter homes. These are usually very nice. It's just they don't need a lot of dirt because they're trying to push that investment inside the walls of the house. So back to Katie's point, if there is no program to plug into to ensure a broader definition of affordability, then we might get some builders that might build some things that might be something that a middle-class homeowner or hire could afford. So politically, and I know this is not the Planning Commission's purview to think politically, so I'm on slippery ice, but the notion of taking away development yield only to get it back if you do an affordable component might be a tough sell. And I think that's where the mayor was coming from, that could we not revisit the minimum lot sizes and increase the yield? And I think, I don't know to what extent he has thought through what connection there could be to an affordable program, but I know this has been a topic that the GIC committee has talked about. I can tell you several years ago, there was a lot of folks in the community that were upset that the downtown development yield for residential was essentially doubled to 200 beds per acre without some trade-off of the same sort. So I think that's very much the mindset, is if we open the doors for more, there needs to be some community value that is being addressed by giving more to the private sector.
I heard you say that the housing subcommittee has completed work on minimum home sizes.
Yes.
Should we know what that is? I mean, one surely has to have something to do with the other.
They are, I mean, they are connected. I don't know that, you know, when you look at this table that we have in front of us, there's no mention of the minimum house size.
Right.
And that's on purpose. But I can tell you the answer, I think where the committee landed after talking with Doug Hansford, the chief building official, is their comfort level is to lean on the building code standards for dictating what is the smallest home you can build, and not really having a hard and fast number, but having something that can be built safely. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so I'm also curious, how would this kind of direction, like one thing that's always kind of bothered me is that we have in some of our older neighborhoods lot sizes that are less than 5,000 square feet. And I feel like sometimes they come up and it's like, oh, well, it's already a non-conforming lot, so like there's already kind of this negative connotation already with it. And that's always kind of bothered me because it's 5,000 is such an arbitrary number, and these houses were here way before that number even existed. So is there a way to maybe tie it more into a percentage of building and square footage of lot, like a percentage of the space that's being taken up by the built space versus the actual lot that's available? And then that way, if you wanted to build a 300 square foot house on a, I don't know, 2,000 square foot lot, I don't know what that actually would look like, but you know, maybe it's more about the size of the lot versus the structure, rather than here is this threshold that we've set and that's it.
Maxine?
I really think there's something that, I think there has to be some connection in there somehow. I certainly can't articulate it, but there certainly seems to be something that we ought to be talking about there in relation to the two that we haven't.
So the other part of the table that I shared with you is lot coverage. So that is stepping in the direction of home size, but lot coverage encompasses more than just the footprint of the home. It also includes the driveway, any patios, accessory structures, sidewalks, any kind of hardscape would be in lot coverage. And depending on how far we want to go with amending the text of the code, the most coverage you can have in any zone is 50%. So in our most dense single-family district, RS5, you can have up to 50% of your lot covered. And
Or 50% of your lot uncovered. I think
Okay.
that's kind of the component we're looking at.
correct. And to Kristen's point earlier, when you see what 50% lot coverage or 50% uncovered looks like, you start to realize where there might be a boundary. Could we have more lot coverage? Perhaps. But I think if we started looking at 60, 65, 70% lot coverage, you would see an appreciable difference that is not necessarily very good for a lot of other things that we're trying to manage. So stormwater being one of them, heat island effect, I mean, all kinds of other things, that externalities that we're trying to manage. So the other part of this is, yes, we should be thinking about how much dirt should you need for a certain type of house. But that needs to be the sequence of thinking. The way the process works, very few people have their house designed and then they go looking for the lot. Or then go buy enough dirt for this house. It's far more typical, the way the housing process works, is that the land is divided first, and then at some point down the line, maybe it's within a couple months, but maybe it's a decade later, a house is built. So the subdivision of the land is really, if we make it dependent on knowing what the house size will be afterward, we would be requiring developers to have their house plans all finished and cited without ever having subdivided the land. But I hear your point, which I think is more along the lines of have enough land, just enough to do what you want to do, and not more. You shouldn't have to buy more. If you only want to build a modest home, you should only need an appropriately modest lot size to accommodate it. Is that what you're getting at, Kristen?
Yeah, and you're right, and you're also right about for RS8, for example, the maximum lot coverage of 45% can look. It's fascinating how I've seen these houses that are built right up to 45%, and you're like, Jesus Christ, how huge is this house? So yeah, it's really interesting how that plays out in real life. That's it just seems so much different than what it is on paper, and maybe some of this just goes to the style of house, and some houses just look bigger than other ones. So even though they have just as big a backyard and you just don't ever see it, so you don't think it's there. I don't know, but yeah, but I kind of do like this direction of thinking about proportion rather than these are our set buckets that everything has to be in.
Okay.
I also like the idea of reducing minimum lot sizes and letting the lot coverage and building codes determine, the shape of the house.
How much of that to like more form-based code? That's something I keep meaning to read more on, and I haven't been able to, but.
Yes, have we talked about?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, have we debated form-based code? Because that would solve a lot of these problems.
I mean, honestly, there's a part of me that wants to come out as a committee and recommend we just move to form-based code.
I would support that.
Bruce, would we just make your head explode?
No, well, okay, so
Be
so
some
the
people on the commission who would support that too.
Yeah.
yes. No, what we have is a hybrid code, and the difficulty with a form-based code is is not the form part. I think a lot of people can wrap their mind around the notion of regulating by form. The hard part for communities is letting go of use. And form-based codes, a true, pure form-based code does not really sweat use of the land. What's that? What?
Doesn't have to be pure. I mean,
Yeah. So
you could look at performance standards.
Correct. And that's where I think easing away from a minimum square footage on the homes, I think is a step absolutely in that direction, where we're not dictating that sort of thing. And Katie, to your point of having lot coverage, and maybe some semblance of setback that we're talking about, so you get appropriate separation of structures for health, safety, and wellness. But the going beyond that, I hear you. The minimum lot size issue, though, when we have a town that thrives on investment building, is a real important dynamic to keep in mind. We have a lot of speculative development action with a marketplace of mamas and diddies that like to buy homes for their children, using large stacks of money that don't really represent the economy that we have here in Athens. And that minimum lot size has been an important metric for us to keep in place to ensure some degree of compatibility with what new development looks like and how it is sited. So this is where we're in tension, is everything that we would love to do to achieve affordability and true diversity of residential units in our local market. Every one of those creative solutions is a potential student housing complex for a developer that never lived here, is never planning on living here, and is not really providing housing for somebody who's in need. And so that's where we have to, we're running along a tightrope a little bit. There's tons of room for creativity. We just have to have our eyes wide open about the folks that may use those powers for evil and not for good.
Seems like
I'm sorry, Kathy.
this speculative development is just completely counter to any of our goals for affordability, and much bigger and more powerful than any little incentives we might put in zoning. It's just an aside. Maybe it's bigger than a zoning question.
Yes.
Yes. Bruce, I wonder if preparation for our next meeting, this is just a thought, and Katie and Kristen, please say if this would not be helpful to you, but I think it might be helpful to have some pros and cons. You know, how would this help? What are the advantages of doing this? What are the disadvantages of decreasing lot size? What things happen when you do? What things happen when you don't? I think those ideas would be a good discussion for next time.
Yeah, I don't mean to kind of like, this is my little tangent and I'll bring us back, I promise. But I've been listening to the podcast Nice White Parents. And in one of the episodes, she talks about in New York City when they integrated schools, and parents would come back and say, hey, our schools aren't integrated, we need to make changes. And then the superintendent would kind of go through these committees and make some ideas, and recommendations would be made. And then like everything would need to be studied, and then nothing would happen. And then it was like this cycle over and over and over. And it was like, well, public support isn't there. And well, we can't change these rules because of this and da, da, da. And what really struck me was that it was very reminiscent of a conversation we had maybe a year or two ago about not necessarily form-based code, but about rezoning. And because I know there were other members of the commission that thought that there were places that needed some updating or some changes that could be made. And so the whole discussion, it just really struck me how it was like the same type of like just institutional, we can't make this change because of this and this and this, but there really wasn't, I mean, maybe there's evidence of that, but at the same time, nobody really tried to do it. So, I mean, I get there needs to be political will, and I get that, you know, we're talking about property owners. I mean, I'm a property owner. I completely understand. But I also wonder if we've kind of drawn ourselves into a box in terms of some of these rules that we have, and maybe we just need to bust open the box and rethink it from a different angle instead of trying to fix all these things within the columns that we have. So, my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I think that's really the kind of the nature of expectant change anyway. That's kind of where you get when you're trying to change. Are we going to just change pieces? Are we going to change incrementally? Or are we going to just blow it wide open and be as creative as we can get? I think, you know, one of the difficulties working in the public arena for my whole life is that we are in the political arena. And so some of, I think you can do both. You just maybe can't do it as big as you want to immediately or as fast as you want to immediately. But I do believe that real change can happen, good change can happen, creative change can happen. But I think we just have to, again, see what's going to happen when we do this part of it, what's going to happen when we do that part of it, and know that before we decide what direction to move in. That's kind of what I was thinking about the chart. What's the potential, what are the potential positives if we do that? What's really going to blow wide open if we do this? You know, what, and to know those things as we step forward, I think is really important.
I just really want to stress again, it's not really so much the lot size as it is the density, because lot size is below 2 acres. We're really talking about somebody splitting one lot of their extra yard space in their neighborhood. You're talking about 1 or 2 lots here and there, and usually they're going to be very compatible with what's around them. So it's not like anything really different. It's just the same as a neighborhood. Because we've had zoning in Athens for 50, 60 years, and so pretty much the lot sizes have sort of become the zoning over time. But the density is where we have that extra flexibility and how we're going to use that flexibility. That's, you know, whether we're going to, you know, give somebody a bonus if they give us something that we want back from them. That's where, you know, we could look at a positive contribution that way.
And that's the incremental one to move forward. And that's what I think that's what we're saying. You know, is this a place where we're going to move incrementally, or is this a place where we're going to jump into the deep?
Because the over 2 acres, I mean, it's our ordinance in 2000 was really far from what happened before 2000. The flexibility we allow now, at least as far as I understand it, I wasn't here in 2000, but as far as I understand it, I mean, you could come in today with a cluster subdivision, no minimum lot size. Now we have certain standards still for width and depth, but you can go really small, smaller than 5,000 square feet. You know, if you can get down to 3,000 square feet, make it work, okay. But you can cluster your home, save on infrastructure costs, have the rest of the subdivision be open space. And that was the idea behind it. A lot of people having passive space, they can walk in, enjoy the nature. Meanwhile, keep the houses close together for community, save on infrastructure costs, so hopefully help with affordability. So it was really a good idea. You know, again, it's a matter of, you know, if we want to go back and allow the, you know, dividing the acreage exactly by that lot size of 5,000, that would give them the extra bonus lots. What can we get back from them? You know, and if we can work with the housing committee, I think with finding some way of doing that affordable housing element, you know, okay, we'll give you these extra few lots, but we want a percentage of those being affordable. hopefully they're able to come up with something with that, or the GIT committee or somebody. But yeah, let's get something for this. If we're going to give extra density, all these builders, let's get some affordable housing out of it, or something out of it. But yeah, we'll come up with some pros and cons, I guess, before. So we have our joint session next week, and then we can meet the week after that. Is it?
Well, that will put us pretty much to the end of the month if we do that. That'll be our last time to meet. So I'm not sure if there's an appetite to try to talk on Tuesday. Well, not Tuesday, Monday of next week, to make some headway on this, to allow us some time to deal with the Greenfield issue before the end of the month. You're muted, Maxine.
We're saying we want this to go to the mayor in November, or are you saying in October?
Well, for us to stay on track to get this to the Planning Commission in October, we've got to finish up in September.
Did you say?
From my perspective, I think that all the discussions have been very valuable. I hope that they will be of value to the city. I think they've been excellent professional development. It's the school in me, but it's been really good professional development for planning commissioners, because I think we've all come away with a lot more knowledge than we started with, and that's great. But I am never in favor of doing something halfway just to rush up and do something. So I'm in favor of doing something well. If you can't do it all, you just say, Kelly, Dr. Mayor Kurtz, we're sorry we were not able to get to this. We'll be glad to take it on in January, get back to you on it. But this is all we could do. And do good work. I won't finish that, but half work. And just say we did it all. The last three are not very good, but we rushed. I'm not for that.
Understood.
Anybody else have a thought on that? I just pontificated.
Well, so Bruce, you mentioned compiling something. What do we talk about the idea of you compiling something? I mean, what is even possible in a time frame to pull something together for us to look at that would be examples of, like, what are we even talking about? Like sort of a pros and cons of what we have now versus what, like, form-based code? I mean, that sounds like it sounds like you could write a book about that. And what's even possible in like a week time frame?
I would say proposing a form-based code is not possible.
Yeah.
But if that's where the committee wants to go, then absolutely, that's what we need to say out loud. Is the solution to this issue is not in the structure of the code as it appears today. The structure of the code itself needs to be revisited on this particular topic to achieve anything meaningful. If that's where the committee's going, then I think that's the answer.
But you could do both of those. You certainly could say, looking at dealing with it in this way, here are the things that can be accomplished. We would recommend beyond that we really get into some heavy discussions about form-based code. That's not part of this.
I think what you just said, Maxine, is a completely fair statement. I think right off the bat, I would say that if we went smaller and kind of aligned with the Housing Committee's recommendation of allowing for smaller structures and to also allow for smaller minimum lot sizes, but also make a strong recommendation that this is really not the full solution. I mean, I completely understand what you're saying, Rick, about we can't allow more density without this trade-off. But like, we also are kind of hamstrung because we don't have any sort of mechanism of like enforcing affordable housing, like we lack this sort of the second part to that. And I just don't know I feel like we're only dealing with half the issue if we're talking about like subdivisions smaller than 2 acres.
Yeah, we wouldn't be forcing it. I don't think, and I think there's some question of legality of actually forcing an affordable element into a subdivision. But by giving it a carrot, by saying, hey, you guys want these extra houses, and we are working on a way of doing a managing an affordable element, a third party or somebody to look after Athens Land Trust or somebody to, we talked about that with these cottage or what they call courtyard developments we had. I know the Athens Land Trust actually took over one of them. And people talk about, we had another one proposed where they said, what if we bring in Athens Land Trust to make sure we have a few affordable houses? Well, they'll manage them or something. So, if they want these extra houses, they get a little extra profit, but we also get some affordability. So that's just what we're saying. If we can give them something in return, so we both gain, everybody wins type situation if there's a possibility there.
That makes sense to me. So the proposal is just to change the bigger than 2 acres rule back to the
Make it
same.
apples to apples. Yeah, if you can
Okay.
work out 5,000 to an acre, it's about 8 lots, I guess. So, if you can go from the 6 to the 8 lots an acre, then those 2 extra lots, work with us. So maybe half of those become affordable. I don't just some kind of percentage where we get some affordability out of it. They want that.
Do you guys have capacity to research if this has been done somewhere in Georgia and if it's actually produced affordable units?
Bruce, have we researched that?
Well, yeah, we've got the capacity to do that, and there have been affordable housing programs in Georgia that have functioned successfully. How they have incentivized it tends to be with density increases, and so that's exactly what we're talking about.
Do we know the threshold for like at what point it's worthwhile for a developer to add that affordable unit?
Well, that's always been the sticking point is how much of a density increase actually will entice a developer to do the affordable bump. What's it going to take for them to do something that they're not used to doing? Or are we then saying we're only attracting to town the folks that know how to do affordable housing? And that's a fair question too. Maybe that is what we want. I think having it as an option, having it as a density bonus rather than a requirement is probably as far as we're able to reach right now. But I know that the land use, that's us, the housing side, the GIC committee, and easily half of the commission, the county commission, are very serious about having some sort of affordable housing program that, as Rick said, either we subscribe to, that is handled through a third party and managed by a third party, or that we as a county government manage ourselves. And that's why this charge, that was the big push behind Kelly's charge, was to be looking at these ancillary issues because that issue was being looked into by the GIC committee. So to bring their part of the sandwich and our part of the sandwich together was, I think, his intention. Right now, we just haven't seen a lot of activity landing that affordable program. And so, Kristen, you're spot on. Like, we're having a long conversation and a good conversation about what density does. And Rick and I and Aaron, we're happy to dig in next time we meet and give you examples and show you maybe what a change of going to 6 to 8 looks like, what a change of going to 6 to 10 looks like physically on a sample sort of piece of dirt, and show, ooh, that's too much, or yeah, we could do a little more. but that's the extent of the exercise that we can do until we have that affordability program to connect to. So Maxine, your notion of having a series of recommendations that sort of are either phases of implementation or they're choices.
No, I wasn't meaning in terms of recommendations. I was meaning in terms of points so that we could have a knowledgeable discussion. So that we could know, okay, if we do this, this is what happens. They might, I mean, they could evolve into some kind of recommendation. Let's hope they would, or some components of them would. But I think we got to have an idea of what, if we do this, here's what we can get out of it, but here's what's going to happen. You know, I think that's the kind of look we've got to do.
And I think at this time, you know, because we are sort of have short time left for, you know, I don't think we have to come up with definite numbers, you know, as far as, you know, we're not trying to write an ordinance at this time. Now, we send these sort of concepts up to the mayor and commission and they want to follow through on it. Then we'll have a lot more time to study and research it and come back with an ordinance. So we don't have to worry about really crunching numbers at this time. Well, we need more research definitely on these type of issues to come up with certain numbers. You know.
So this is true. So maybe in that sense, we can kind of form this concept of here's option A, where we're looking at smaller minimum lot sizes and other places in Georgia that have been able to, like, they have already have some sort of component in place in their code that we can maybe model after these because they seem to be successful, maybe. And then the second one being, but then if we really wanted to make an impact, there's this other form-based code option that we can also explore as well. So we don't get numbers and specifics.
But the other component, and I'm not in anything that I've said wanted numbers. I wanted numbers in the first discussion we were having. I'm not talking about numbers now. I'm just saying if we did that, if we do this, here's what will happen. Here's the productive component of it, and here's what's not good about that. I think we have to have something like that we can look at. Kristen, is that anti what you're saying, or is that what you're saying? I'm not sure.
No, I think we're on the same page. Yeah,
okay.
I think it makes sense.
Okay.
Bruce, is that, you mentioned Monday, is that something we can throw together by Monday? I know. I don't want to, you just mentioned it. I don't want to, I'm not, you know, that's a lot, but.
Would it also make sense if we're already planning on meeting on Thursday to maybe powwow for like 30 minutes before or after that meeting to kind of, you know, have a chance to distribute this stuff in advance and talk about this separate from that, or is that just too much?
I can't do it after at all.
Okay.
Thursday.
I have another Zoom at 7:30, so.
Thursday at 4 or 5, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I could do something like that.
Our joint session's at 5:30.
8:30, so we could do like 4:30.
4:30.
Is that better than doing a different night? I can do either, but I'm trying for you all who are working. Is it better to do this long stretch from 4:30 to 7:30, or is it?
I mean, it seems to be my Thursday night routine now, so.
Katie, how about you?
This is next Thursday?
Yeah, the night of our work session.
That's fine. Yeah, I want to clarify. I might have gotten off track. So we could just look at that one line in the subdivision. You know, the subdivision is greater than 2 acres.
Yeah, and then we'll come up with some pros and cons like Maxine wants, and you know,
Okay.
if we do this, this is the ramifications.
Here's the good.
Okay.
Here's the not so good.
Okay. I mean, if the idea is just add some kind of affordability bonus, that just the idea without any specifics that that seems like a good idea to me.
If,
Um,
and if we can, if we do end up wrapping it up that night, then obviously, we'd have another week. If you guys want to do the infill setback standards that last week, the fourth week of the month, so gives a chance to get look at that issue. But if we get there, not saying if we get there, but
I think you're really thinking that we can.
I'm always positive.
You want it done. That's the problem. You want it done, but to do one in one night and one in one night is just.
I know.
But anyway, we can certainly try our best to do what we can. To support what Katie's saying, I think, if we are simply trying to do minimum small steps, this is a good way to go. But I do think that we ought to have enough discussion to conceptualize something that might be bigger and more creative, that we might simply say, we recommend, we think a great deal of discussion is needed about today, whatever that is. And while we didn't have the time frame to do that, we really encourage that discussion because it would change this. So I think we need to say if we want to move, if we think moving further would be a better, a more logical next step that would help us. Let's say that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we posed the idea. This mayor commission seems very open-minded, and if they want to go that direction, we'll have a lot of time next year, hopefully, or sometime to think a lot more about that, research that whole issue of form-based codes. So.
I have to say, if we are going to do some out-of-the-box thinking on anything, now's the time to do it.
Oh yeah.
With the commission we have. We have to jump on time-wise of using the kind of commission that we have it right now. That doesn't always be, that's not always the case. So we got it. We want to do something creative. We got to step on it. Okay. So we're going to meet then Thursday at 4:30.
Okay.
And that'd be great. Bruce, if there's any way, and poor Bruce, we just ask him to do so much, but if there's any way you could send that out to us even 24 hours ahead, so we could get a little look at it, I think that would help our discussion, especially since we have two people who haven't even been here tonight. That it's going to be hard to jump in, and then they will want to have discussion that we may have already had tonight, but they need to have too. So that's going to elongate our time, I think. But still, I will let Joey and Lucy know that we're going to meet to get some information for further discussion next week.
Okay.
All right. I once again, I don't want to jump ahead, but I see no problem with, deciding that we will incentivize density in exchange for, moving the yield back to the same for the less than 2 acres. But we opened a huge can of worms in terms of how do we prevent developments like the one on that Kristen brought up. Like that would take a form-based code. Is everyone else on the same page? Because I might have gotten off.
Yeah, no, I think where we are. That there's a further discussion that we really need to have to keep certain things from happening.
Okay, but if we just
to help other things happen, not just to prevent, but also to enhance.
Yes, encourage good things. But I think if we just change that one density requirement, it wouldn't actually change that much. The only thing it would change would probably we might get an affordable unit here and there.
Yeah.
Is my guess. Do you have that impression, Rich and Bruce?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it can be as simple as that and leave the door open for much more progressive changes. I think that's a great way to approach it.
Okay,
Okay, it's a little after, and I think we're at a good stopping place. So thank you all for your work. Thank you, Bruce and Rick and Aaron, if he's here. So we will see you all next Thursday at 4:30. Okay.
All right. Have a good
Okay.
evening.
All right, you guys.
See ya.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.